Well, hey, one more time, welcome to 3D, and want to welcome our friends joining us online as well. How many of you say that looks really inviting? I mean, like, how many of you would like to just sort of be transported there right now? Pretty amazing, eh? And, actually, we do have a number of our core team that are in that environment right now, literally, and enjoying themselves. But how many have ever felt like you just wanted or needed to get away from it all? Have you ever felt that way? And like you would just like to be in an environment like that? Actually, they have some pretty good deals going on right now if you Google it. But I believe there's some other questions we need to ask ourselves at this point in our journey if we're saying, I just want to escape it all, I want to get away from it all. And the question is, why do I want to get away? What is it that I want to get away to? What am I looking for? Those kind of questions really begin to, I think, run to the forefront. What is it that I'm really after? And I would ask this, if it's just to catch up on my sleep or get a little bit of R&R, why is it that after I get a little bit of R&R, I come back and I still feel like something's missing? You know what I'm saying? In other words, I believe it's because what we really need is a different kind of R&R. We need a rest of another kind. And here's the good news. That kind of rest is available. Let me just give it to you right up front, though. This rest is not found in a particular location. This rest that our soul craves is actually found in a particular person. That person being Jesus. And so it's found in the ultimate getaway, and it's by invitation only. But if you're looking for that kind of soul refreshing, you came on the right weekend, because this is the invitation that Jesus extends to all of us today and every day. Here it is in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 and 30. And I love the way it reads in the Message paraphrase. Eugene Peterson just sort of took some of the original and paraphrased it. Here's what he says. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Let's all say those three phrases together. Walk with me, work with me, and watch how I do it. And then he goes on to say, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I love that phrase, the unforced rhythms of grace. He says, I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. And then he says, keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. How many would say, that sounds inviting? I mean, now, come on, y'all. Y'all raised your hand when we showed you a little bit of the islands. How many would agree that what Jesus invites us to experience is even better than an island? It's better than Hawaii. It's better than Tahiti. It's better than a cruise. It's better than whatever you envision it to be. It really is, because it's something that provides for you at the core of who you are, not just for your body and your physical senses, but for your soul. A real rest. I would say it's the ultimate getaway. And the ultimate getaway is not found, again, in any particular location. In fact, it's not even found in religion. Speaking of religion, here's a story that I came across recently. And John was the only Protestant in a predominantly Catholic neighborhood. And every Friday during Lent, his neighbors were eating fish. How many of you were raised Catholic? So you understand a little bit of this world. And this is certainly not in any way meant to be a hit on Catholicism. It's just sort of the reality of people that grew up in that environment. And so it's Lent season. They eat fish every Friday. They can't eat other kinds of meat. And anyway, this neighbor, John, who was a Protestant, the only one in this Catholic neighborhood, was in his backyard grilling steak. Well, that became an issue. They couldn't stand the temptation, decided that they were going to collectively make it their objective to see him converted to Catholicism. So they began to bridge relationship, began to pursue him, began to spend time with him. And over time, after several talks, John agreed, and they took him to church. And so John went to the Catholic church with him. The priest sprinkled water over him and said, you were born a Baptist, you were raised a Baptist, but now you're a Catholic. Poof, it was just that simple. A year later, during the first Friday of Lent, the neighbors smelled this same smell and aroma of this steak grilling in his backyard. And they were sort of torqued by the whole thing. And they said, what's up with the steak, man? This boy's a Catholic. And they went over to his yard, and they all came over there together, and they found him in the backyard sprinkling water on his steak. and said, you know what? You were born a cow, you were raised a cow, but now you're a fish. How many wish it was that easy? You know what I'm saying? You just sort of sprinkle something. But religion itself will never provide for you the rest that you need. How many of you know that's true? Why? Because religion actually, I think, because I grew up with it for the first 18 years of my life, doesn't provide a rest. It actually steals rest because it's so focused on ritual and rule keeping and performance-based living, which I find to be very exhausting. See, religion is man's attempt to somehow get to God on the basis of his performance, thinking, if I do this and X, Y, and Z, and I'm a good person, then God's going to accept me. I'll gain his approval based upon what I do. Whereas true Christianity is all about God's attempt to get to man, where Jesus becomes one of us, and he comes to us and invites us then into a relationship with himself, and it's not based on what we do, but based on what he did for us at the cross. That's Christianity. And so you understand then why he said, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Religion, rule keeping, rituals, all that kind of activity. And so he offers this irresistible invitation to get away with him and recover our life and learn to take a real rest. And so here's what I want to say, because today's talk, we're continuing a series entitled iNNOVO, and which is a Latin word that means to be made new, or actually to be better than new, and we've sort of set it up with taking Psalm 23 as our primary text and foundational text for this, where we began in the first week of the series with that first verse. He said, the Lord is my shepherd, and because the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything that I need, or I shall not want. And then he goes on to say, he, Jesus, the great shepherd, makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. And then it says, he restores my soul. That's where we camped out last week, talking about how Jesus, as our great shepherd, restores our soul. And we illustrated that as a shepherd would do for a sheep. And if you weren't with us, you can catch that online or download it, avail yourself to it. But where we're going this week is, I said we'd come back to it because this is sort of a complement to last week, and they sort of work hand in glove. We need to spend some time today talking about rest. Rest, what that really looks like, what it's all about, because I think really the rest that Jesus offers is much better than a good night's sleep or a weekend getaway, and it's a rest that liberates us to become all that he created us to be in the first place when he brought and thought us up. And so this rest, listen to me, is rooted in Christ's work and not our work. So as we communicated from the first week of this series, we talked about a new approach in one of the weeks of the series. And maybe what I said is you have to realize that this new life that you're looking for in 2015 isn't going to be found necessarily in working harder, being more determined, more resolved, more disciplined, but maybe it's not found so much in the idea of trying harder, but trusting more. It's not going to be found, as we communicated last week, in actually achieving based on what we do, but actually receiving based on what Christ has done. And so that's really the environment we step into this week. Next week, we'll take a closer look at the root of our weariness and get the next week. You will not want to miss it. I'm not hyping it. I'm serious. I'm just so full of what I believe God wants to communicate to us next week. I believe it really is going to be significant and has the potential to bring significant change into our lives, because there's something about this whole idea of rest that goes a step further when we talk about our souls. Anyway, we'll get into that next week. We're pretty reluctant, however, how many would agree with me, to trust someone we don't know? How many would agree with that? I don't know about you, but if I'm just getting to know somebody, I'm sort of checking them out, you know what I'm saying? Giving it some space, giving it some time. And if at the root of our weariness and exhaustion and fatigue is being overextended and on the edge of burnout, maybe it's rooted in a lack of trust in the God who says, I invite you to enter into my rest. And so this whole idea then centers around our ability to trust God. Therefore, it's essential, as we communicated last week, we must believe foundationally that God is good. He's for us, not against us. He loves us. He has our best in mind. Anything he offers us is because it's the best thing for us. We just have to believe that. And so that is part of the whole journey we looked at last week. And one thing we said last week is that just like a shepherd assumes full responsibility for all of his sheep, when you become one of his sheep, in other words, he becomes your shepherd and your Lord, Jesus assumes full responsibility for everything that you're going to need, whatever that is. However, there are a whole lot of us who live our lives as if we have to pull it off ourselves. And that's precisely, I believe, what creates the burden and wearies our soul. And it's also precisely what Jesus is offering us a break from. So let's take a closer look at this irresistible invitation from Jesus. When you came in, you received not only a worship guide, but some message notes. You can pull that out and follow along. I want to look now at the same verses in the New International Version, Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Jesus said this, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Then he says some language here that I'm going to break down a little bit. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your" what? Your souls. Not for your body. This is a different kind of rest. It's rest for our souls. And then he goes on, he says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." What does that mean? Well, we're going to talk about it. But Jesus is offering us an invitation, and with it, an incredible promise. This is not just an invitation to come to Christ initially for salvation. It certainly is that. But it's all that and more. Jesus is inviting us to come to him to experience life his way. It's an ongoing, open invitation. Are you ready for this? To a better way of life. It's a life. It's a journey. It's not just a one-time experience. So let's go back now to the paraphrase from Eugene Peterson, and then I'm going to break it down even further. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. And here's this phrase. I love it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Now, that to me is an invitation that's hard to resist. It's incredibly enticing. I think it sounds refreshing. And it is. It's an invitation to relationship. He said, get away with me. Work with me. Walk with me. Watch how I do it. That's what he's communicating here. And so I think the best way to illustrate this is I have some friends that I invited to come up here this morning and join me up on the stage. Take this phrase. You guys want to come on up right now, Tim and Nicole, and I'll introduce them once they get up here. But this whole idea of unforced rhythms of grace. How many know that life is based on rhythms? Life is cyclic. Everything about life is cyclic and rhythms. And he says, learn these unforced rhythms of grace. I view this whole idea of walk with me, work with me, learn how I do it. It's almost like an invitation to dance. So the question is, how many of you like to dance? Okay, all you dancers, go ahead and stand to your feet. No, you don't have to yet. But Tim, can you break it down for us just for a minute? Tim likes to dance. Just give us a little something, brother. Come on now. I'd sing, but that would mess up the dance. It is. All right. So this is Tim and Nicole, and they just are an amazing couple. Growing to love them all the more every time I'm with them. But anyway, I learned that Tim loves to dance. Yeah, give it up for Tim and Nicole Frazier. They're a great couple. But one thing that you maybe don't know about them, Tim loves to dance. Nicole just sort of is okay with the deal. How many of you are married and sort of that's the way it is in your world? One of you loves it and the other one not so much. That's my world. Julie loves it. Me not so much. I can't sing. I can't dance. I can't talk in front of people. I'm just not much I can do. You know what I'm saying? And so this whole deal, though, is if you'll notice with Tim and Nicole, he took the lead. She followed his lead. There was movement. There was fluidity. They were just sort of in this rhythm of dancing. And that's how I envision my relationship with Jesus. That's how I envision your relationship with Jesus. It's a dance. He invites you to enjoy and learn these unforced rhythms of grace. Here's the key. He takes the lead, and we just follow. Didn't we learn that last week? He said, my sheep know my voice, and they follow me, and they won't follow another one. They don't follow somebody else. They follow his lead. And that's where we find life, is in following Jesus' lead and staying close to him and in a rhythm of dance with Jesus. So that's really what it's about. And so this invitation actually also invites us into an understanding, discovery of revealing two very important principles of life that will bring rest for our souls. I want to give you both principles and then talk about them. First one is the principle of first. If you're taking notes, the principle of first, or first fruits. In other words, God will bless whatever you give him first part of. The first part of, he will bless, and whatever that is. And so you give him the first part of your day, the first part of your week. We call it the Sabbath, and we'll come back to that, the whole idea of a Sabbath rest. And then you give him the first part of your income, the first fruits or the tithe. You return that to God, and he promises if you'll do that, he'll pour out a blessing you can't contain. But that's the principle of first. I'm convinced that some, if not most, of our frustration, listen to me, and weariness comes from trying to make life work, are you ready for this, independent of God and his principles for living life. That's where most of our stress, our weariness, our exhaustion, our fatigue actually, I think, come from. And so we work two jobs trying to make ends meet rather than trusting God by following his principles of financial freedom and blessing, where he says, I know what you need before you ask. Look what it says in Matthew 6, 32 and 33. Your heavenly Father already knows all your needs, and he will give them to you if you give him first place in your life and live as he wants you to. So he says in another verse in Scripture, he says, if you'll return to me the first part of your income, the first 10%, the first tithe, and give offerings, then I will bind the one who devours from you, and I'll pour out a blessing you can't even contain. We're in this whole 21 days of prayer and fasting. Our theme this year is overflow. You begin to live out of the overflow of the abundance of what God pours in as you honor and enter into these rhythms of grace. And so that principle of first is a rhythm. And so here's the point. Jesus is that the burden that Jesus is alluding to is the burden we place on ourselves. We try to pull it off ourselves. And so he gives us this word picture here regarding a yoke. A yoke. So what is a yoke? Now, some of you have maybe an agricultural background, or you're studied, you understand some of this. For some of us, it's like, what is that all about? A yoke is what actually connects a team of oxen. So you take a lead ox and a younger ox, and you would team them together. And so the older, seasoned ox actually guided the journey, with a younger one that was still in training being yoked to that other oxen. And so they were yoked together, but the one took the lead, the other followed. And that's the invitation that Jesus invites us into. So this word yoke that's used here in the New Testament was written in Greek. The Greek language actually references that every rabbi, Jesus being one of many rabbis in his day, had a yoke. A yoke was their set of teachings based upon the Torah, or the law, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And so they would set it up, and then they would provide teaching centered around that from their angle, from their bent, and invite people to become their disciples. Jesus chose his disciples, and then they followed him. And then as they were following him, he said, you know what? My yoke is different than these other rabbis over here, because they bring you back under the law. But he said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, because his yoke is an invitation to yoke with him and follow his lead as he leads. And it's a yoke called grace, not law. That's why it's so amazingly liberating. And so we'll continue to emphasize the significance of that. But he said, my yoke is easy. He was contrasting it with the yoke of the Torah, or the Old Testament rule keeping. And so we understand then, Jesus was basically saying that you need to yoke yourself with me. And his teachings was known as that. The word yoke literally means, are you ready for this? What's the word yoke mean? It means a beam of balance. A beam of balance. A balancing beam. Like, here's the best illustration I could think of. Wasn't able to find one to bring in here, but like a teeter-totter. How many have ever been on a teeter-totter? I wanted to get one to bring a couple of you up here, one maybe a little bigger, one a little smaller, and see what that feels like. But how many remember back in the day, you were in school, you get on teeter-totter, and some big kid would get on the other end, and you would then, just go flying up, and then he would jump off, and you would crash. Am I the only one that ever experienced that? teeter-totter, beam of balance. That's what he's talking about here. And he says, if we're going to be healthy and enjoy the journey, we need to understand the principle of first, the Sabbath, and the second principle is the principle of balance. Unforced rhythms of grace. Now, how many of you, I'm going to shift gears, but I'm stepping into this second principle, the principle of balance, which is also called the principle of the fulcrum. That'll make sense once I get to that point, but I want to set it up with a story that some of you may be familiar with. How many have ever heard the expression, handwriting on the wall? How many have heard that expression? Where did that come from? It came straight from the Bible. Somebody pointed to their spouse. No, it actually came straight from the Bible. And it comes from a time in Israel's history when they had been taken captive by the Babylonians. Babylon is modern-day Iraq, so it's like modern-day Iraqis. And they were brought there by the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, who had a son that succeeded him. His name was Belshazzar. And anyway, that was what was going on. They had been taken captive. And so there's a great story of lots of drama. I'm not going to fill in all the drama right now. But Belshazzar is arrogantly opposed to God, and really this hand appears out of nowhere. Literally, this happened. It's in Scripture. And it wrote a message to him on the wall. And that's where we literally get our expression, handwriting on the wall. It comes from this story. And so what was it, the message that was written on the wall? Well, obviously it was written in Hebrew, but it said, Mene, Mene, Teke Perzim. And you're saying, well, what does that mean? Well, just like you don't have a clue what it means, neither did Belshazzar. He didn't have a clue what it meant. He saw this handwriting on the wall, the lettering was there, but he didn't know what it meant. So he called in all of his magicians and astrologers, and he asked them, what does this writing up here on the wall mean? And none of them knew what it meant. And then one lady spoke up and said, well, you know, there's a young guy that's been reported to be able to interpret dreams and signs, and his name's Daniel. I bet you he can tell you what that means. So they bring in this guy named Daniel, this kid, and Daniel comes in, and he's in that environment, and all of a sudden he is brought in, and they ask him, so what does this mean? And he said exactly what it means. It's found in Daniel chapter 5, verse 26 and 27. This is what these words mean. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. How many of you have ever weighed yourself on the scales and been found wanting? Wanting to lose some weight. Now you got a verse for it. But it really, what he was saying is, when we weighed your life, not your physical body, we weighed your life, and we found it to be, are you ready for this? Out of balance. We weighed your life, we observed your life, and we found your life to be out of balance. And he said, you know this is what's going on. And it's things that aren't important have become the big deal, and at the same time, important things have been ignored or pushed to the side. And because of that, he said, listen to this, not only because of that is your life out of balance, but because your life is out of balance, your days are numbered. Your days are numbered. I think there's a message in there for all of us. When we allow our lives, are you ready for this, to get out of balance, it takes the life out of life. We're not living in these unforced rhythms of grace. We're trying to do it on our own. We're out of balance. Our lives are found wanting. See, there's a universal law called balance. It works in every area of life. A few years ago, it's been a number of years ago now, Julie and I had a car. We had to put new tires on it. We put all 4 tires were new, and it always wanted to veer to the right. And we thought, we just put new tires on it. We had a line, so we took it in. They checked the alignment. Everything was fine. We obviously left, and we went back driving, and it still would veer to the right. So we took it back again, and what they found is one of the tires was sort of a little bit faulty, but it wasn't, it didn't have the right amount of air in it, and it was actually a bad tire. And so what they did is they had to replace that brand new tire. But once they did, and all the tires were up the right standard of air in them, then all of a sudden we were able to drive that thing without even hardly putting your hands on the wheel, and it stayed its course, went straight down the road. You're saying, what made the difference? There was a weight that was out of balance. And our lives are like that, aren't they? When our lives are out of balance, we travel down the road of life, but it's bumpy, it's rough, it makes noise, it just isn't pleasant. But when we get our lives in balance and we dance with Jesus in these unforced rhythms of grace, how many of you know it's a smooth road? Now, I'm not saying there won't be obstacles and opposition. Please hear me on that. That is not what I'm communicating here. But the point is, we can come to this place of balance and life becomes what God intends it to be. And so doctors say that when you get sick, it's literally an imbalance in some part of one of your systems in your body. Engineers tell us that a building that is balanced can handle greater stress than a building that's not balanced. Ecologists tell us that there must be balance in our ecosystem in order for it to function as God designed it to. See, all of nature is in an order, and there is a balance even in God's created order and system. God made a balanced world. To prevent burnout, we must balance our work with our play, with being, with doing, intake, with outputs, giving, with receiving. All of life is intended to be lived in balance, in this rhythm. So Ecclesiastes 7:18 that years ago became somewhat of a life verse for me. And the writer of Ecclesiastes, who was Solomon, said this. He said, "It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. And the man who fears God," are you ready for this, "will avoid all extremes." But how many of you know, in and of ourselves, we're given to extremes, aren't we? I mean, we'll fast and not eat anything, and then we go pig out. Or, we exercise and we get crazy about being fit, and then we do it, but then we just stop. Or we want to get to a place where we're financially responsible, and so we do everything we can to get our finances in order, and then we just go spend money we don't have, to buy things we don't need, to impress people we don't like. And then we're back in that funk again because it's not in balance. See, for balance to work, we need to understand balance, and that's why I said it's the principle of the fulcrum. So back to the teeter-totter. How many would agree that we all sort of get this idea? I don't know, this isn't big enough for you to see and for me to illustrate. If I had a yardstick, it might work better. But if you could balance a yardstick on your finger and just say, okay, and right here I have my work life, and I have, my family, and I have my friends and social life, and I have all these things going on. And then it's sort of like we want to keep it all balanced, and we're just like always moving. I believe the principle of the fulcrum says there are points in life where you need to move the beam. So let's get real practical. You may be in a season of life where you have young children, and you may be more of a career type mom, but you're choosing to stay at home during this season, so you move the fulcrum over here, and that brings more balance to your life for that season. Then you move into another season of life, and they're in sports, and you're actively involved in their world, and you make some adjustments again with your work or your schedule, but during the day you're able to go back to work because it's a different season. So we have to understand that as we learn these unforced rhythms of grace and we dance with Jesus, that with this principle of balance, there are times where we move it because that's what keeps it in balance. There's certain things you can do in certain seasons of your life that you can't do in other seasons. Paul said, you know what? I'm a single dude. I wish you were all single, because if you were like me, you could be more consumed with the things of God. Now that you're married, you're sort of preoccupied with this whole other deal over here. How many of you know what that's like? And so there's seasons, and you move. See, just as balance is built into God's creative order, here's the one I want to sort of talk about briefly and share a few stories and then move into our response time. So is rest. So let me begin by asking you, when does your day begin? When did your day begin? Help me out. This is maybe hard for you to feel like you can participate, but how many of you say, when I get out of bed, silly? How many of you say, yeah, when I get out of bed, my day sort of begins? I would submit to you, in the Western world, in our logical minds, that's when our day begins. But if we step into God's created order, remember, God created a world that functions on balance, and it also is a world that functions with the principle of rest. Really? Yeah, let's begin in the very beginning when God created. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. We're skipping a few verses, but it's each created day. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. So when did day begin? Evening. There was evening and there was morning the first day. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. He goes on, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day after he made man. And then what did God do on the seventh day? The Bible says he rested. God's seventh day was a day of rest. Are you ready for this? Our first day was a day of rest. The principle is, listen, we don't rest from our work, but we rest and we enter our work from a position of a healthy soul because it's rested. Every day is that way, and the Hebrew calendar functions that way. And so he says there was evening, there was morning, the first day. This isn't just a matter of semantics, this is about God's created order. So your day begins not when you get up, I would submit to you, but your day begins when you go to sleep. Sleep is on the front side of work, not the back side. What's the point? God created activity and work to be birthed out of rest, and we need to cooperate with God's design. Jesus said, walk with me, work with me, learn how I do it. Walk with me, work with me, learn how I do it. Learn my order for life, and you'll be able to engage in these unforced rhythms of grace, the natural flow of God's design. See, the principle here is a Sabbath rest. So just as our day begins at sundown and work is to flow out of rest, so the Sabbath is the first day of our week, and we enter the new week from a position of strength and health as opposed to exhaustion. This is a true story. During the French Revolution, they actually outlawed Sunday as a day of rest. This is true. They outlawed it. Why? Because during that revolution, they wanted everybody to work, and they wanted them to work every day. A few years later, they were forced to reinstate it because the health of the nation had totally collapsed. Listen, you and I were not made to go at Mach speed 24/7, 365. God has built into his genius of created order rest, the Sabbath. So let me share with you a little bit of my own journey. Years ago, had a friend that was at Amsterdam 2000, which was a convention, a congress, a gathering to actually bring some of the evangelical leaders of the entire world together. Billy Graham headed it up, and they were determined to figure out how can we finish off the Great Commission in our lifetime, taking the gospel of the kingdom to all nations of the earth. And so that was the big idea. He met a guy there from Tanzania. He invited that guy to come to the U.S., and actually then he did. He stayed in his home. He invited him to come to church. I have some pictures I want to show you. His name is Augusta Mpemba. He invited us over and over again to actually come to his country after he'd been in our church, and just an amazing individual. His name is Augusta Mpemba, and he goes, "Oh, my brother, you must come to my country. Oh, you must come." He said, "My people will love you." And he said, "They are not like you Americans. They will actually do what you say. When you teach, they will follow you teaching." He says, "You must come, my brother." And after his third trip to our country and to our church and the third invitation, I finally said yes to go into his country to do a leadership conference. And I had designed some material through what we called a Leadership Institute that we hope to launch here this fall, and some resources I had pulled together. So I thought, okay, I finally said yes, and we went over. We did this leadership conference. Hundreds and hundreds of pastors and bishops and even government leaders from all over East Africa showed up at this leadership conference. And then we also did some evangelistic work, and we did these meetings where we just preached, and he translated for me. And this guy is so phenomenally good, and you'll get a chance to experience that at some point, that he actually made me look better than I am. How many know Jesus does that for all of us? I mean, he really is. I'm not hyping it. The guy's phenomenal. I mean, he was so in sync that I didn't even have to stop talking. He was translating that quickly. And so we did these evangelistic meetings, saw hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people give their lives to Christ. We did that every year. Well, one year we were there, and I could tell he was tired. And we were leaving after about 7-8 days of working with him and doing this leadership conference, then doing these outdoor evangelistic meetings. And so he took us back to the airport, and we went through in Mwanza, which is where he lived, the city of Mwanza, about 2 million people right on the southern coast of Lake Victoria. About a 2-hour flight from Dar es Salaam, the nation capital, which is over along the Indian Ocean. And so we were there at the lounge that only like senior officials could go through, but in their context and their culture, they actually treat pastors and bishops at the same level, if not higher, than government officials. And so we, obviously, because that's what we were there for, we were escorted through. And we were in this lounge waiting for all of our luggage to get through and everything checked. And I remember talking to him. I said, you know what? I'm just concerned. You talk about all that you're doing, and you're tired. And I just said to him, I said, so do you take a day off? Do you have a Sabbath? And he says, oh, no, my brother. We must work. You know, the word says a man must work while it's yet day, because night is coming when no man can work. There's so much to be done for the kingdom, my brother. And I said, okay. Well, I said, I just want to encourage you to look into that a little bit. And then I shifted gears with him. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, do you tithe, as in return the first part of your income, first 10% to God? And he says, oh, yes, my brother, we must do that. And I teach my people, and my people do. Yes, we tithe. And I said, well, listen to this. I said, the Sabbath is to your soul what the tithe is to your finances. Somehow we've learned that we can live better off of 90% with God's blessing than 100% without it. Some people would say, I can't afford to take a day off because I have too much to do. And so I remember having that conversation with him. We followed up, and we as a church pulled some money together to actually bless he and his wife and give them some time away, and because they were just amazing couple, work hard. Fast forward the tape, it wasn't long after that conversation that I found myself having hit the wall of burnout. And there are a number of contributing factors, but one of the primary reasons is that I consistently violated the Sabbath. I wasn't taking a day off. Our church was growing. It was just going crazy, and everything was up and to the right. And we added campuses. In fact, in one stretch, we added 4 new campuses within a period of 3 years, and the church more than doubled. It was just crazy. And the church was flourishing, but Keith Boyer was not. My soul was not healthy. And I made a number of very unwise choices in the context of that season, to the point where I then had to step away and take a sabbatical. And the church was very gracious to us and gave us that space and gave us resources so we could do that. I tell you that story because it's real. But more of the story is back to our friend Augustine Mpimba. So while we were journeying with them, we not only did these evangelistic outdoor meetings, and we did these leadership conferences. We went every 18 to 24 months over a period of about 8 years, and just back over. And it was just a phenomenal thing that God was doing. He shared his dream, and one of his dreams was to build the first ever 24/7 Christian radio station in the country of Tanzania. And we said, well, what's that going to take? And calculated it was probably somewhere around $100,000. And so over a period of time, our church gave so that we could build that radio station, put the tower up and the extensions to it. And once it was done and completed, it had a reach of, within the Lake Victoria region, at 10 million people, even out in the bush area with transistor radios. And people were being reached with the gospel. It was on 24/7 family ministry and that kind of emphasis. But through that, he would literally teach every day on the radio station, and some of his teaching was very clear. Well, obviously, if 10 million people are listening, there are going to be people listening that don't share the values and the message that's being communicated from a biblical worldview, the Bible, from Scripture, and other faith persuasions. And so there was a faith persuasion that got onto him, found where he was located, and sought to take his life. And he narrowly escaped death twice. And the second time, he literally just made it by minutes and escaped the country, flew here to the U.S., and had to seek asylum here, which was granted just in the last 8 months. And he's continued to serve and lead his church from this distance. He's continued to do everything he can And yet his family, they had to have guards posted. And so his family, as you'll see here, he has not seen them in 2 years. He's been here in the States. His family's there. And now once he was granted asylum, he petitioned for his family. They now also have been granted asylum. And he's pulling together resources to be able to fly back there and gather his family, bring them here to the States until there's such a time where he can step back in. He doesn't want to live here. He feels called to his homeland. And yet he's just this phenomenal leader. And there's more I could say. I've said enough for today. What I want to say today is that you'll get to hear from him live in 2 weeks. He's going to be here speaking on our Sunday morning service. And it's going to be a phenomenal message. In fact, we've been communicating with each other, and we really feel like God spoke to us that this is the year of rest and restoration. But in order for there to be restoration, part of that is rest. And so he'll be speaking in the context of that. And how apropos for him that this year, after 2+ years being away, he's going to actually physically be restored to his family, and they're going to be together. And so we're already committed financially to supporting them. I've already committed some funds. You just come and hear his story, and he's a powerful communicator. You will not want to miss it. You'll want to bring friends, but bring more friends next week who they can then in turn bring friends the next week. You got that? Okay, that's good. All right, we need to wrap this deal. Exodus 20:9 and 10. You have 6 days in which to do your work, but the seventh day is a day of rest dedicated to me. See, the primary objective of the Sabbath is not just to rest from your work, but rest for worship. One of the benefits of a Sabbath is to be in an environment like this, where we're going to step into here in about 3 minutes when we get into our response time, where you're going to be able to experience God's presence in a collective, corporate way. And within that, something shifts within us. When we begin to see things from God's perspective, how many would agree with me? It puts everything in perspective. When you see that God has this whole thing figured out, He's in control, He loves you unequivocally. I mean, He's for you, everything we've communicated. And you experience that, something shifts in your soul when you step back into the week in front of you. And so you enter your week from a position of strength and fullness, not from exhaustion. Does that make sense? And so as we begin to transition and move into our response time, I just want to say this. I believe the secret to experiencing the rest that Jesus is promising is to rest from your own work and place your faith in the work of Christ, what He did for us. See, Jesus is inviting you and I to let go of religious rule-keeping and ritual and enter into not just initially a relationship with Him, but an everyday dance with Him. He's inviting you to stop trying to pull it off yourself and place your trust in Him. It's not about what we can do. It's about what Jesus has already done. It's all about trust, rest. It's not about achieving. It's about receiving. And so as the team leads us, I want to encourage you just to receive His love. They're going to sing a song that His love washes over me. Our prayer has been all week long, that during these next moments we have, God's love would just wash over your soul. Wash away the weariness. Wash away the exhaustion. Wash away the fatigue. And then once that's washed away, filling and replenishing your soul. Even in these moments, because I know that God can do more in 5 minutes than we can do in 5 years.